You know what the worst feeling in the world is? It's not failure, it's not rejection, it's not even heartbreak. The worst feeling in the world is lying in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, and knowing deep in your gut that you're capable of so much more than what you're doing right now. That feeling of knowing you're settling, that feeling of knowing you're playing small, that feeling of knowing there's a version of you out there, a stronger, bolder, more fearless version, and you're just not becoming that person. You're choosing comfort over courage. You're choosing safe over spectacular. You're choosing the weak version of yourself over the warrior you were born to be. And here's the thing nobody wants to hear, that weak version. It's not going anywhere unless you decide to crush it, not gently nudge it aside, not politely ask it to leave. Crush it. Destroy it. Burn it to the ground and rise from those ashes as someone unrecognizable to the person you were yesterday. I want to talk to you today about something that changed my entire life. Something that took me from a girl in a small town with big dreams that everyone said were impossible, to standing on stages around the world, to working in industries that told me I didn't belong, to building a life that once existed only in my wildest imagination. And that something is this: the decision to stop being comfortable with mediocrity. The decision to wage war against every excuse, every fear, every limiting belief that kept me small. The decision to crush the weak version of myself every single day. Because let me tell you something, that weak version is persuasive. She's got all the best arguments. She sounds so reasonable. She says things like, maybe tomorrow. She says, you're tired, you deserve rest. She says, who do you think you are to want something this big? She says, remember last time you tried and failed. Let's not go through that again. She says, other people have advantages you don't have. She says, it's too late. She says, you're too old, too young, too inexperienced, too different. That voice, it's a liar. It's the voice of every dream you'll never chase. It's the voice of every opportunity you'll never take. It's the voice of a life half lived, a potential half realized, a story that ends with, I wonder what would have happened if. I grew up in a middle-class family in India. My parents were doctors, and while we were comfortable, we weren't connected to Bollywood. We didn't have relatives in the film industry. We didn't have a pathway paved for us. When I won Miss World at 17, I thought the universe had handed me a golden ticket. I thought doors would just open. And yes, some doors opened, but they opened to rooms full of people who looked at me and said, you're not quite right for this. My nose was too big. My accent was too Indian. I wasn't the conventional beauty. I wasn't from a film family. I was an outsider trying to break into a world with very tall, very thick walls. The weak version of me wanted to go back home. She wanted to say, well, at least I tried. She wanted to accept that maybe this wasn't meant for me. She had a million reasons why giving up made sense. But there was another voice, quieter at first, but growing stronger every day. A voice that said, you didn't come this far to only come this far. A voice that said, they don't get to decide your worth. A voice that said, everything you want is on the other side of these obstacles. So I made a choice. Every single day I made the choice to show up. When they said my nose was too big, I showed up. When they said my accent wasn't right, I worked with a coach for hours and hours and showed up. When I didn't get callbacks, I showed up. When the films didn't work, I showed up. When people wrote me off, I showed up. Because showing up, even when every fiber of your being wants to hide, even when you feel inadequate, even when you're terrified, that's how you crush the weak version of yourself. And here's what nobody tells you about crushing that weak version. It's not a one-time thing. You don't just wake up one day and decide to be strong and then you're strong forever. No. It's a daily practice. It's a moment-by-moment choice. It's choosing the hard conversation over silence. It's choosing the workout over the snooze button. It's choosing to send the email even though you're afraid of rejection. It's choosing to start the business even though you might fail. It's choosing to be vulnerable even though you might get hurt. It's choosing growth over comfort again and again and again, until the strong version of you becomes your default setting. I remember when I got my first opportunity to work in American television, I was terrified. I was entering an industry where I was even more of an outsider than I was in Bollywood. I was brown in an industry that barely had representation. I had an accent that I'd been told to change. I had imposter syndrome screaming so loud in my head that I could barely hear anything else. The weak version of me said, "What if you're not good enough? What if they realize you don't belong here? What if you fail on an international stage and everyone back home sees it?" But I had learned something by then. I had learned that the weak version of yourself will always have an opinion. She will always try to protect you from discomfort, from potential failure, from risk. But protection and growth cannot coexist. You cannot be both comfortable and growing. You cannot be both safe and extraordinary. You have to choose. So I chose. I chose to walk onto that set scared but committed. I chose to do the work, to prepare obsessively, to give everything I had. And yes, there were moments when I wanted to run. There were moments when I felt out of place. There were moments when I questioned everything. But I kept choosing the strong version of myself over and over. And slowly, something shifted. Not just externally, yes, the show was successful. But internally, I started to realize that I belonged anywhere I decided I belonged. That my worth wasn't determined by other people's limited imagination. That my accent, my background, my differences weren't weaknesses. They were my superpowers. You want to know the secret to crushing the weak version of yourself? It starts with getting brutally honest about who you're being right now versus who you're capable of being. It starts with looking in the mirror and asking yourself the hard questions. Are you giving your best or just enough to get by? Are you pursuing what you actually want or what feels safe? Are you speaking up or staying silent? Are you taking risks or playing it safe? Are you showing up as the person you admire or the person you've settled for being? And I'm not talking about comparison here. I'm not talking about looking at someone else's life and trying to become them. I'm talking about the gap between your current self and your highest self. The version of you that exists in your most inspired moments. The version of you that knows exactly what you're capable of. The version of you that's been waiting patiently for you to stop making excuses and start making moves. I'll tell you something that changed my perspective entirely. When I moved to America, I realized something profound. In India, I was always trying to fit into a mold that wasn't made for me. In America, I was just as much of an outsider, but this time I decided not to try to fit in. I decided to stand out. I decided that being different was my advantage, not my disadvantage. And that decision, that shift in perspective, that changed everything. See, the weak version of yourself wants to fit in. She wants approval. She wants everyone to like her. She wants to color inside the lines. She's risk averse. She's afraid of judgment. She's worried about what people will think. The strong version of you, she knows that extraordinary things never came from ordinary approaches. She knows that if you want different results, you need to do things differently. She knows that the people who changed the world weren't the ones who played it safe. They were the ones who were willing to look foolish, to be misunderstood, to stand alone if necessary. Let me share something with you. I've failed more times than I've succeeded. For every film that worked, there were films that didn't. For every opportunity that came through, there were dozens that fell apart. For every moment of success, there were months of struggle. But here's what I learned. Failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of success. Every failure taught me something. Every rejection redirected me. Every setback set me up for a comeback. The weak version of you sees failure as a sign to stop. The strong version sees it as information, as feedback, as a stepping stone, as proof that you're trying, that you're taking risks, that you're in the arena. You know who never fails? People who never try. People who play it so safe that they never put themselves in a position to fail. And you know what? Those people never win either. They never experience the thrill of achieving something they once thought was impossible. They never know what they're truly capable of. I want you to think about something right now. Think about the dreams you've buried, the ones you used to talk about when you were younger, the ones that made your eyes light up, the ones that felt so big and so exciting that they scared you. What happened to those dreams? Did life get in the way? Did people tell you to be more realistic? Did fear convince you that wanting those things was naive? Here's what I need you to understand. Those dreams didn't go away because they weren't meant for you. They went away because the weak version of yourself convinced you that you couldn't have them. That voice that says, be realistic, is just fear wearing a disguise. Because realistic according to whom? According to people who gave up on their dreams. According to a society that values security over fulfillment, according to a world that would rather you stay small and manageable than big and disruptive. When I decided to pursue Hollywood while maintaining my career in Bollywood, people thought I was crazy. They said you can't do both. They said pick one. They said you're spreading yourself too thin. They said you'll fail at both trying to do everything. The weak version of me was tempted to listen. She said, maybe they're right. Maybe I should just be grateful for what I have. Maybe wanting more is greedy. But the strong version said something different. She said, why not both? Who made these rules? Who said I have to choose? And so I didn't choose. I went after both. Was it hard? Absolutely. Did I have to work twice as hard as everyone else? Yes. Did I have moments where I questioned if I was insane? Every single day. But I also proved to myself that the only limitations I have are the ones I accept. You need to understand something crucial. The world will not give you permission to be great. The world is not waiting to validate your dreams. The world is comfortable with you staying exactly where you are. So if you're waiting for someone to tell you it's okay to want more, to be more, to do more, you're going to be waiting forever. You have to give yourself that permission. You have to become your own biggest believer before anyone else believes in you. I've sat in rooms where I was the only woman, the only person of color, the only one without connections, the only one with an accent. And in those moments, the weak version of me wanted to shrink, wanted to be invisible, wanted to just get through the meeting without drawing attention. But the strong version learned to take up space, to speak up, to share ideas, to be unapologetically myself. Because if I wasn't going to advocate for myself, why would anyone else? And here's what happened. Sometimes people didn't like it. Sometimes I was called aggressive when a man would have been called assertive. Sometimes I was called difficult when I was just asking for what I deserved. Sometimes I made people uncomfortable. But I realized that making people uncomfortable wasn't a bug. It was a feature. Change always makes people uncomfortable. Growth always makes people uncomfortable. Excellence always makes people uncomfortable because it holds up a mirror to their own mediocrity. So I stopped apologizing for wanting more, for being ambitious, for taking up space, for having standards, for refusing to settle. And the moment I stopped apologizing for being too much, I attracted people who celebrated that about me instead of trying to dim it. The weak version of yourself apologizes for existing. She makes herself smaller so others feel bigger. She dims her light so others don't feel overshadowed. She downplays her achievements so others don't feel inadequate. The strong version of you. She shines without apology. She lifts herself up and brings others with her. She knows that her success doesn't take away from anyone else's. There's enough light for everyone. I want to talk about fear for a moment because fear is the weapon the weak version of yourself uses most effectively. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of success, fear of being seen, fear of not being enough. Fear disguises itself as practicality, as logic, as wisdom. It says, I'm just being realistic, when what it really means is I'm too scared to try. I've been afraid more times than I can count. I was afraid when I first walked onto a film set. I was afraid when I moved to America. I was afraid when I started my production company. I was afraid when I wrote my book. I was afraid when I spoke about issues I believed in, knowing I'd face criticism. Fear didn't go away with success. If anything, the stakes got higher, so the fear got bigger. But here's what I learned. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is feeling the fear and doing it anyway. Courage is acknowledging that you're terrified and taking the step regardless. Courage is understanding that on the other side of fear is everything you've ever wanted. Every single thing I'm proud of in my life exists because at some point I felt afraid and did it anyway. Not because I stopped being afraid, Not because I suddenly became brave, but because I realized that the cost of staying the same was higher than the cost of change. The pain of regret is greater than the pain of discipline. The ache of what if is worse than the sting of least I tried. So I started using fear as a compass. If something scared me, if it made my heart race and my palms sweat, if it made that weak version of me scream, don't do it. That's exactly what I needed to do. Because growth lives on the other side of fear. Your next level lives on the other side of fear. The life you dream about lives on the other side of fear. The weak version of you runs from discomfort. The strong version runs toward it. Because she understands that discomfort is not your enemy. It's your teacher. It's your trainer. It's the fire that forges steel. You don't become strong by lifting easy weights. You become strong by challenging yourself, by pushing past what you thought was possible, by doing the thing that scares you. I remember reading something once that said, a comfort zone is a beautiful place, but nothing ever grows there. And it's so true. Think about every major period of growth in your life. Was it comfortable? No. Was it easy? Absolutely not. Was it worth it? Every single time when I was filming Quantico, I was working 18-hour days. I was flying back and forth between continents for other commitments. I was exhausted physically, mentally, emotionally. The weak version of me said, you can't keep doing this. Something has to give. You're going to burn out. And yes, it was hard. Yes, there were moments I cried from exhaustion. Yes, there were moments I questioned if it was worth it. But the strong version of me said something different. She said, you're being tested. This is where most people quit. This is where most people decide it's too hard. But you're not most people. This is where you prove what you're made of. This is where you show yourself what you're capable of. And so I kept going. I found reserves of strength I didn't know I had. I learned to manage my energy better. I learned to ask for help. I learned to prioritize. I learned that I was capable of so much more than I thought. And here's the beautiful thing. Once you push through a barrier you thought was your limit, once you achieve something you thought was impossible, your entire world expands. Suddenly, things that seemed out of reach feel achievable. Dreams that felt too big feel possible. That version of you that you thought you could never become, she starts to feel accessible. But it starts with that first decision. That decision to stop listening to the weak version of yourself. That decision to stop making excuses. That decision to stop waiting for the perfect moment, perfect conditions, the perfect circumstances. Because perfect doesn't exist. There will never be a perfect time. There will always be reasons not to start. There will always be obstacles. There will always be people who doubt you. There will always be unknowns. The difference between people who achieve extraordinary things and people who don't isn't talent. It isn't luck. It isn't connections. It's the willingness to start before you're ready. It's the willingness to figure it out as you go. It's the willingness to be bad at something before you're good at it. It's the willingness to be uncomfortable, to be uncertain, to be afraid, and do it anyway. I wasn't the most talented actress when I started. I wasn't the most beautiful. I wasn't the most connected, but I was willing to work harder than anyone else. I was willing to show up every single day. I was willing to take the criticism and use it to improve. I was willing to fail and get back up. I was willing to bet on myself when no one else would. And that's what I need you to do.